I'm very excited to talk to you about Open Planet. We're a relatively new organisation. I was just chatting with Paul and Anna. Lots of us that work there have been around the block quite a few times, but the organisation itself was only created a year ago. We launched at the UN General Assembly last year with our beta platform, and then our new All Singing, All Dancing platform went live in June. So yeah, really lovely to be here to talk to you and tell you all about it. And because we're visual storytellers, I thought I should probably start by sharing our story visually. So I'm hoping, Anna, that you're going to be able to show that sizzle reel that I shared with you. Lots of us are familiar with storytelling. Some of us feel really comfortable with the idea of being storytellers ourselves. Some of us think about it as wizardry and magic. But much of the earliest human communication was around storytelling, and it helped us to communicate with each other, to understand our place in the world. I mean, we've all seen pictures of cave paintings, and they've been so important to shape global politics, education, and to really help us to imagine the future that we want to see. I'm sure lots of you are familiar with some of the facts. 65% of us are visual learners, and people are 22% more likely to remember information when it's wrapped in a story. So they're incredibly powerful vehicles and have the power to change the way that we think and the way that we feel and act. And we can use them to make the big and the complex feel understandable and accessible, to feel personal and relevant. And there've been big paradigm shifts in society, but they don't tend to happen without powerful storytelling. They often act almost like a Trojan horse, and they can help us tip from bringing something into awareness, into really starting to embed it in culture, just the sort of where social norms are changing, and it's just the way we do things around here. If you think about the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter recently, and also just the incredible impact that the ITV showing of the post office programming had. So in this urgent decade where we absolutely have to take action, we already know what we need to do. We know so much about how to protect and restore nature. We know that we need to stop using fossil fuels and shift to clean energy. But I imagine most of you would agree with me that change isn't happening at the scale and pace that it needs to. And we have to create that enabling environment for that stronger and more urgent policy and leadership and decision making. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you that we're at risk of making irreversible changes to our world. You might be familiar with Johan Rockström's Planetary Boundaries. We've collaborated with him on some of his storytelling, which has been a huge honour. And we've already passed 6 of the 9 safe limits. We're at risk of breaching the 7th, but it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. And we've also worked with Professor Tim Lenton, who you may be familiar with from Exeter University, and he's done extensive research on the positive tipping points and how we can transform our world for the better. So at Open Planet, we absolutely believe that the climate and nature crisis is also a communications crisis, and we're not going far enough or fast enough. And so in order to collectively shift the dial and to accelerate action, we've got to supercharge storytelling at an exponential scale. We've really got to capture people's imagination so that they put down their phones and they stop doom scrolling and they pay attention and listen. And we also need to capture people's imagination so that they can think about the possibilities. So it's not just this narrative of cost and sacrifice, but it's shifting the narrative into this story of optimism and solutions and a better world where humanity can thrive with nature. And what's really interesting about storytelling and where people are gathering their information is that over the past decade, technology has completely liberated content creation and the distribution, and it's unleashed millions more storytellers. But this high quality, credible, trusted footage of our changing planet, the problems, but also the solutions and the hope and optimism, it rarely exists. And when it does exist, it's often expensive to buy, or it's owned by major broadcasters. And for all sorts of really good reasons, it's gathering digital dust in the archives. And that's a huge barrier for most communicators and storytellers. And it either leaves them with an absence of content or potentially mis and disinformation, unreliable sources because of AI. And so Open Planet was created to help unlock those barriers and start to democratize content so we can drive new and more powerful storytelling, and to do that from diverse voices, and to have those diverse voices speaking to their own audiences so we can exponentially expand the number of stories being told and shift that narrative and tip into different behaviours. So if I tell you a little bit about Open Planet, we are an award-winning library of world-class footage of our changing planet, footage and data visualizations, and we're capturing the problems, but also the solutions and the hope and optimism, and then we're open sourcing all of it and making it freely available for education and impact. So that means that all of you can go onto the platform and use it for free. You're very, very welcome. There is a commercial library, so the footage can be used commercially, and the good news is that any profits from that go into powering the platform for good. And our ambition is to reach 2 billion people by 2030 and contribute to this tipping point in climate and nature consciousness. And we're doing that in 4 different ways. Firstly, we're building the infrastructure. So that's capturing and sharing these stories from around the world. The second is about growing our clips library. We've got about 12,000 clips at the moment, and we want to grow that to 150,000 clips. We've already got quite a comprehensive collection, but what we want to do is be able to cover all of the key issues, all of the key geographies, to be able to tell both local and those more global and macro stories. And thirdly, we're building our global network of influencers and communicators and storytellers, and I hope we can include all of you in that. And then fourthly, we're thinking about technology and how we can harness things like AI to improve our reach and impact, increase efficiencies, and enhance the user experience. And we're working with everyone from the BBC and Netflix. We've got more than 60 leading filmmakers all over the world, and we're unlocking archives and we're collecting new content. And then we're working with anyone and everyone from really big NGOs and the UN to small NGOs, individuals, scientists, educators, world leaders, companies, and content creators and communities, and sort of those really grassroots entities, to help them to tell their stories. And that's both by using our library because it's freely available, but also then filming and creating new content through our award-winning production studios. So that because stories like the intersection of human health and climate hasn't had a lot of airtime, it's starting to get greater awareness and visibility. So collecting content on that has been really important. And that means that anyone anywhere can access this really powerful content. And we were created by quite a unique set of circumstances, including the fact that our founders were Studio Silverback, who are now Open Planet Studios. And you may have heard of them. They've done lots of the David Attenborough documentaries that you see on broadcasters like Netflix, Disney, and they absolutely understand the power of reaching hundreds of millions of people through these massive documentaries, but also the opportunity to make that content go even further and be even more powerful by democratizing it. So we're breaking that content down into bite-sized chunks like you'd find on Getty and Shutterstock. And then every shot's verified, it's scientifically accurate. You can see who took it, when it was taken. And then we've got talking heads like Tim Lenton, who I mentioned, who can explain some of the science. So it's not then about one big documentary, it's about thousands of different stories on endless platforms. And that really leads into our theory of change, which is that we're only going to make this society-wide change happen fast enough if we can shift the narrative and move from this cost and sacrifice narrative into this much more positive narrative of hope and optimism, and that we can change who's telling that story and how it's being told. So I just thought I'd give you, I feel like I'm talking for a long time, I just thought I'd give you a couple of examples of some of the projects that we're working on, just to give you a flavour of the kind of content that we've got that's going to be coming online and how it might be relevant for you and your audiences and organisations. Because whether you see yourselves as storytellers or not, we're all communicators, and it's really important that we speak to our audiences in ways that's appropriate for them. So one of the biggest examples that we've done so far was an initiative called Planet India. It was a huge visual storytelling campaign that coincided with India's presidency of the G20, and it was sponsored by DP World. And we filmed 10 eco-entrepreneurs from across India. So we captured these stories, really interesting, cutting-edge, very different stories, and we created these really powerful films which were used in the plenaries of the G20. But then we clipped and open sourced all that content on Open Planet. And we partnered with content creators and a platform called Pluck TV. You may have heard of them. It stands for People Like Us Create. And we worked alongside them and Joe Cinema so that the content creators could take that same content, but then use it to engage their audiences in their way. So we had people like travel bloggers, food bloggers, there was an exercise influencer, and they put their content out there. And that really helped to shape the G20 agenda by elevating and celebrating India's grassroots solutions. And the content trended, and Planet India trended on X and Joe Cinema for the 2 weeks of around the G20, and it reached over 400 million people in its first 2 weeks. So it was really significant. And then we've worked more recently with Welcome, who you may well have heard of, on a storytelling project about the intersection of climate and human health. And we focused for the first year in Kibera, which you may well know is the largest informal settlement in Nairobi. And we filmed the impact of flooding and how the community is responding and adapting. So we told the story of an organisation called Weather Matami, who, my doorbell's going, the story of Weather Matami, who are putting out weather forecasts in different local languages so the community's got warning and can respond and react. But what they're also doing is organising clear-ups and clean-ups afterwards, because amongst other challenges, the standing water carries waterborne diseases. That's a huge, huge problem. And so again, the films that we made were used in high-level meetings, from the World Economic Forum to the Planetary Health Summit. But as importantly, we work with local content creators. So again, we open sourced the footage, and local content creators were able to use it to tell their own stories. So one of my favorites was working with Wax's Animation, who spliced the content together with spoken word and animation. And they used a living language from Kibera. So it's living because it's constantly being reinvented by the young people. So, you know, the grown-ups and the police don't know what they're talking about. And what that meant was when that content was shared, it was incredibly powerful. And we know from speaking to them that for youth groups in the community, it just connected them into the content in an incredibly powerful way. And it both helped them to better understand their experiences, but also then connecting them with the more macro issues that were going on in the world. And that content reached 10 million people digitally, and it directly engaged over 12,000 people. So that included decision makers, local leaders, local community, and young people. So it was really powerful. And then in terms of what we've got coming up, we've got some really exciting projects in the pipeline. We've got 2 big feature documentaries coming up, and the rights to all of that, they've actually been filmed with the idea that that footage will go on Open Planet, which means that they've filmed additional content for us. And all of the rights to that's been gifted to Open Planet. So it means that we can clip it all and make all of the footage available on the platform. So the first one's in partnership with David Attenborough, and it's all about the ocean. It's celebrating 100 years of the ocean and coinciding with David's 99th birthday, which is an extraordinary thing to comprehend. And it's going to premiere in May, and then it will go on Disney Plus and Nat Geo in June. And it'll be the largest collection of footage of the ocean, and it'll all be open sourced and free to use for education and impact. So if the ocean is an important part of your communication and storytelling, that's something to look forward to. And then the second feature documentary is focused on biodiversity. And we know that this is an increasingly important topic. And I was at COP16 recently. So we know that particularly for businesses, they're really actively starting to think about both the risks and the opportunities that nature presents for them. And so that biodiversity feature documentary, it'll be hosted by an A-lister, it'll be streamed on a big global platform, and it's being designed to cut through to a mass audience. So not just your natural history buffs, but much more wider society. It's going to premiere at COP30, and we're going to build a big impact campaign around it that individuals and organisations can be part of. And the pillars include food systems, nature restoration, and sustainable finance, and also education. So it just enables us to have as much influence and impact as we can with that really powerful content. But as well as big projects like that, we've got all sorts of other storytelling projects in the pipeline, from the green energy transition to female eco-entrepreneurs in the Middle East and North Africa, thinking about gender equity, and also hopefully a UK project in the pipeline with the Wildlife Trust. So we're also just thinking really creatively about how the content can be used in new and different ways. So thinking about gaming, thinking about learning and development. And we really want Open Planet to be a valuable resource for the business community. So we've been exploring the potential to work with some businesses to help them tell their brand story with integrity. So finding that sweet spot between greenwashing and green hushing, because it's so important to show the solutions and the hope and optimism. And also talking about using the content to help with training frontline colleagues around how to speak confidently with clients about these issues. So I hope you've got a sense of what we're up to, what we've got, how it might be useful to you, the power of storytelling. I could talk about this for days. I obviously won't. But yeah, I'd just love to, hear your thoughts, hear what you're doing around storytelling. I hope you'll find the library a really valuable resource. You can be part of impact campaigns we're developing. We can help you with your storytelling, and yeah, please help us grow the platform. So yeah, I don't know if you've got any questions.